What's up with you and the donkey?
I love it, man.
This is
That's
the second
crazy
time.
to make that funky little noise.
Wait, stop. This is the second time in our recording session today you mentioned donkeys. What's up with that?
I just think they're crazy. They
No,
made a
why you got
worse
donkey
horse.
brain?
What?
Why you got donkey brain? Why are you on the Why are you donkey?
I'm just thinking about
Man.
it. Are you trying to get me to say it?
I'm saying, what video of donkeys were you looking at before you came here?
You don't even want to know.
Or who were
Mr.
you talking
Feet.
to about donkeys with last night?
Last night? Why did this have to be an evening act? What is this?
I don't know, because
implication there?
you hang out with people and then you go to sleep and then you come here.
What are you talking
And so
about?
I feel like
Last night I was
you
talking
got
about donkeys
you got
with people.
donkey on the brain, and I want to know where it's
I
coming from.
have a personal thing involving a donkey that happened to me recently, and I don't know if it's super appropriate for the podcast, but you are about to witness a future viral star's rise to fame.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.
Welcome to the barnyard, motherfuckers. My name is Brace Belden.
Was it a chicken? That's a pig.
Uh-huh.
Look, I'm good at this. Like a fucking baby. What is that?
You know what that is, right?
No.
You know what I'm hitting with the
That's your cow?
That's a fucking moo. They don't say moo. They go moo. It's a realistic cow.
Cows are, those are my guys. Fucking love cows. Like, I'm crazy.
You love cows?
Yeah. Those big faces. They have the biggest faces. They're
Facts.
so cute. I love them so much.
What
It's
other-
really hard for me to eat beef.
What other little guys they got on the farm? Caw, caw. That's the crow who lives in the barn.
You're kind of scarecrow-esque.
Me?
My name is Liz.
So
You already said
skinny.
your name.
You're scarecrow-esque because you're so skinny.
I'm not acknowledging that. We are joined, of course, by Professor Young Chomsky.
The bull.
And this is TrueAnon.
Welcome to the farm. The funny farm. The fucking farm.
Hello,
What?
everyone. I was reading about farms earlier, actually.
What were you reading about them?
About all this shit going down in France. The
Oh.
farm protests.
Yeah, European farmers, they're kind of, I'm hearing about them all the time.
Well, it's a pretty fucking big deal what's going on.
What are they doing?
In France?
Yeah.
Well, they're starting to blockade Paris after negotiations with the prime minister tanked. The new prime minister, a very young new prime minister. But before that, it's been like weeks and weeks of different blockades in the south. But now they've moved up to Paris in the north, and they're blockading the entrance to Paris. They've been destroying imports. It's all about price pressures and regulations.
European farmer
and
style.
yeah, the EU is like currently negotiating. It's actually really interesting. The EU is currently negotiating new free market imports. So they would be bringing in a bunch of stuff from South America, but they wouldn't be holding the South American farmers to the same regulations that EU farmers are held to, including a bunch
This is
of
a classic
environmental
classic EU
classic.
conundrum.
And so that, along with other price pressures, inflation going insane, and changes in consumer tastes, there's just a lot of shit happening with farmers.
What an apt name for an organization. EU.
Yeah.
'Cause it stinks.
Yeah.
I think that Europe should join Asia.
Interesting.
I think
a little
it should become-
Eurasia?
No, I think it should just all be Asia. Eurasia
Okay.
has weird connotations to me.
It does.
Kind of everybody who starts talking about Eurasia turns out to be a freak. You know
I
what I'm
think
talking
that
about?
if you make Europe, Asia, that doesn't include England.
Well, of course not.
England's Anglo.
Yeah,
That's the Atlantic.
It's the Anglo-Americans, which, by the way, should
Yeah.
be American Anglos. I know it doesn't sound as good, but who's the big dog? It's another barnyard motherfucker. Rishi Sunak. I'd love to see Joe Biden ride on him like a little fucking, like a mule.
Yeah, well, Sunak would let him do it.
Is Sunak short? He's got to be like 5'6".
I don't think he
or
is
really
actually.
tall?
He's
I can
very
see
tall.
him being weird tall, like a
I thought he was very tall.
one of these alternative but still popular depictions of space aliens. 5'7"?
Oh, so
that's
short.
fucking huge.
He looks tall because he wears the short suits.
Is interesting. If
do
you
you mean
wear
a
short
short
suits, you
suit?
look, what do you mean
He wears,
short
like,
suits?
fucking early 2000 Tom Brown style
Oh.
suits, so it looks like he's a tall guy.
What?
That's
Tiny
outgrowing his
suit.
suit. It looks
Yeah, that's a
What?
little-
You can. So if I wore like
That's
a
a little
tank
Top
top,
Shop gambit from 15 years ago.
if I wore a tank top that was really tight on me and like low rise jeans, people would think I'm like 5'5".
I don't know, but I think you should try it.
I could do that. I could.
Yeah, you could do a lot
the
of
king
things.
of Thailand. If I dressed like him, this shit would be over.
What shit?
I don't know. But something would end, I think, and then something crazy would start. But yeah, that's a good question. I just think that I've never worn a tank top in a spaghetti strap style before.
Oh, like a camisole?
That's a word that I'm not sure of the meaning of, so I don't feel comfortable saying yes.
Interesting.
I've never worn a camisole. I'll say that.
What about a white ribbed tank top with thicker straps and a
What do you
scoop
mean
neck?
ribbed?
Ribbed fabric.
Ribbed fabric?
Well, I love that I love when I say something that's like perfectly normal that everyone knows what it
What is
is, and
ribbed
you
fabric?
look
You know,
and
the way
talk
that
to me
wife
like I've
beaters
just
look?
spoken like Swahili.
Are you talking about the lines on wife beaters?
Yes.
Oh, those are corduroys.
What?
That's a version of a corduroy.
No, it's
a corduroy means stripe.
No.
To me, in my shorthand in my brain, that's
The
a
Swahili
that's a-
that you
I don't
speak.
know that. I didn't know that they made tank tops that didn't have that. So I guess that's what tank.
Well,
top
for
is
what
made
they
out of.
shouldn't, because I think all tank tops are better ribbed.
Ribbed for her pleasure.
Yeah. Ew.
I'm about to get on a plane.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Chicago.
For hot dogs?
Yep. I'm gonna just suck on them motherfuckers.
You don't
until-
suck on a hot dog.
What? You wait? No. You okay?
You gotta stop doing that.
I'm 34, Liz. I'm
You know
too
what
late.
the best hot dog
Can't take
is?
old
I'm
dog
gonna
to
say it,
tricks.
and everyone's gonna get mad.
What?
Which I love saying things that make the people angry.
She's about to say tofu pup.
Great for engagement.
Mm-hmm.
I have been going to a bunch of different New Jersey hot dog places, as you all know.
I didn't know that, but
What?
It's not reflected in your figure.
I've been Hot Dog Johnny's. That's like my spot.
You've never said that.
Are you kidding? I've got
I'm
the
not
mug
kidding. Why
and
am
the
I in
shirt.
trouble?
I
You've
got the
never
shirt with
said
the hot dog on it.
I've never seen it.
I've talked to you guys. You
You
know Hot
come
Dog
in here
Johnny's,
wearing
right?
like 6 sweaters because you're cold.
Well, it's freezing.
So I've never seen a shirt.
Anyway, I got to say, the hot dog at Madison Square Garden, fantastico.
Really?
It's really good. And I'm going to say this, better than a
Suck on
Dodger
that
dog.
thing. Better than what?
Than a Dodger dog.
All right. Well, I'll get 2 in front of me. I'll suck on those motherfuckers, and I'll show you which one's better. I'll slurp them up like a noodle.
Did you ever go to Dodger Stadium when you lived in LA?
No. No, I never did. Go Niners, by the way.
Hey, go Niners.
Go fucking Niners.
Purdy, the
Bang, bang.
angel of history.
Go. Yeah. Listen. I know they're not San Francisco anymore, but if they're doing well, then they are again.
I saw a guy, I told you, I was on a walk the other day. I saw a guy on the street
Pause.
wearing full Niners gear,
So sick.
big old scarf, big floofy hat. He was on the phone, and I was like, yeah, go Niners. He was like, yeah, go
So
Niners.
sick.
Niner gang, bang, bang. E40 versus Taylor Swift.
Easy. Note a Taylor.
Really?
I think in physical combat, she could probably have the stamina to
The thing is E40, as much as I find him very charming and fun, he kind of, real overexposed. He's at all the Warriors games. He's at all the
You're
Niners
just
games.
jealous.
I mean, yeah, I'd like to be at all those games, except for football. I really just I don't think watching football in person is the way to watch football.
It's not as fun.
I think I went to a couple games at Candlestick when I was a kid.
So cold. I did too.
Yeah, very
So
cool. But that was
cold.
part of it.
Yeah.
You kind of wrap up and you get chilly and you
Yeah.
can't see shit because Candlestick was the worst stadium ever, but also fucking rocked.
But you're like when you're sucking on the hot dog, your saliva freezes.
Yeah, stop doing that.
Okay. I
Go
won't do the
Niners.
hand motions next time.
It's us against the world, baby.
It is us again.
Everyone wants Mahomes back to back. You know who doesn't? This asshole right here.
Fuck them. Fuck.
This coastal fucking elite
Fuck Travis
wants her
Kelce,
San
who
Francisco
doesn't-
fucking team to win the fucking Super Bowl.
I just feel like a certain guy on that team doesn't respect women as much as I do. And that, sometimes someone could be happier if other things were different. If
He
that
seems
makes
like a real
sense.
dum-dum.
Well, it's just a football. I mean, come on. We're
I
not.
know,
It's not.
I
We're not.
know.
It's not. That's not the.
I'm talking about Kelsey, not Mahomes. Although, have you heard Mahomes talk?
Yeah, he sounds like a freak. Anyways, circle of prayer that I'm back from Chicago and nothing bad happens to me.
Nothing bad's going to happen to you.
Now that I said that, I feel like something bad will happen to me. This
Why
will
do you
come out
even
after
put
I
that out
died.
there?
I'll take that back. Nothing bad's gonna happen to me. Nothing. No, that's even worse. That guarantees.
What kind
something
of
bad
plane
will-
you flying?
I'm flying on American Airlines.
No, dude. What kind of plane?
I don't know. They don't tell you, do
Yes,
they?
they do.
When
If
are
you
they
look
gonna
for
tell you
it.
that? What do
you
you?
see? Is it a
Is it
Boeing?
a Boeing? What other kind of planes is there?
Well-
Timu. Sorry, I love
No,
saying
there's the
Timu
Airbus,
now.
but
it does not
which
say.
Boeing?
It's a class economy, and then a parentheses V. Not.
no, that's the ticket, not the plane.
Well, where does it say the plane then? It
Oh
just
my
says a bunch of
God.
stuff about the join the AAA Advantage program.
All right, everyone. We have an interview for you today because this is getting real tedious.
This is gaslighting me. Yeah, we have an interview with. I hope the
gaslighting.
sound of me throwing my phone
not
down on the table.
gaslighting.
Liz is gaslighting me like an abuser would, but Liz isn't an abuser. She's just kind of doing what an abuser would do in this situation. But it's cool because I've gone through a lot
No,
of
this
trauma.
is gaslighting.
Interesting that you would say that to what do they call it? Darvo, Darvo. But it's not. That's not. It's not really.
What's Darvo?
Now that's gaslighting because
What?
you definitely know what Darvo is.
What is that?
It's a
For
like
what?
it's a NORAD kind of adjacent thing. Darvo, I don't remember.
Reflect, accuse, something.
Oh, they instituted all these HR shit after I got out of corporate.
Yeah, facts. I don't know if that's well. Anyways, we have an excellent interview about the motherfucking media, and it's before you're like, oh, the media. I think this is a good one.
Yeah, we're talking about New York crimes, everyone's favorite criminal enterprise. Didn't know where I was going
Lies,
with that.
perfidy, and the soft power of Israel. And let's start the show. Yeehaw! Welcome to the Donkey Barn, motherfuckers. Today, here with us in the manger, stroking little Christ's baby little head like one of them freaky licky wise men from way back when, we have with us Daniel Bogus Law, a.k.a. the 2019 law in Kentucky banning bestiality, the most bogus law I've ever heard of. Just kidding. His real name is Daniel Bogus Law. Investigative reporter at The Intercept, here to talk to us about a lot of things. This is going to be a rockin' episode. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know why I'm saying ladies and gentlemen. I'm addressing you, Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So we should start off right off the bat. We'll say you just published, along with Ryan Graham, a piece in The Intercept talking, and this will just start off our conversation, talking about how the New York Times pulled some of its reporting on, I don't know, Israeli rape allegations of Hamas members during October 7th. Maybe we should start there.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, I can talk a little bit about the origin of my reporting on that reporting.
Yeah.
Which was this article came out. They said that it had been the product of 150 interviews, that it had taken 2 months. And I think I was reading it on the subway, and I was just thinking about how I would put together, that article if I had 150 sources, if I had the full resources of the New York Times. And reading through it, it just was, it was a very few number of named sources for the number of sources they interviewed. There was a lot of hedging language around all the major claims that they made.
Like what?
I think there was language like seems to be identified at 7
I see.
locations,
Yeah,
and each like big claim felt a little hedged. And so I think like when you're a reporter and you're thinking like, okay, this is a massive story, this is like a lot of information, how would I put this together? And you're reading through it, and you're reading, they're trying to, kind of put forward this idea that there was a systematic, instructed campaign of sexual violence. And so just from the start, from the get-go, I was kind of like, there's something off about this piece. There's something, these pieces don't fit together the way they normally would, especially at a place like the Times where, they have the resources and the personnel to do something that thorough. So me and my colleague Ryan, we started trying to like interrogate those strange elements and contact as many people at the Times as we could. I think it was challenging to do because the Times is it's sort of like siloed.
Yeah, I was going to say a bit of fortress.
Yeah, it's a fortress. Colleague of mine, former Times reporter, described it as the Vatican, where you have like different little fiefdoms and you have these intense power struggles.
Sounds healthy.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, we found that a lot of the concerns that other readers had found, specifically about the named sources and some of the sort of open source research that people had done on them, really called into question the accuracy of the claims that they made. So we started calling around and we discovered that much like outside of the Times, there was a lot of concern about the piece inside the Times, and specifically that episode of The Daily, which was planned sort of based off the piece.
Yeah, so the Daily, which is Liz's favorite podcast.
I love you actually do listen to it.
I don't listen to it often. I listen to it sometimes. Listen. I always get a little glimpse into the competition, which is they are number one competition. But it is it sort of like functions as like a way to like it's like a New York Times story, but in like This American Lifestyle format or whatever.
It's for everyone's commute to just take in the
With
news of the day.
One of the most charismatic individuals to come out of the news business in centuries, Michael Barbados or Barbadoro or whatever. One of the baddest, meanest motherfuckers in the news. But I do want to contextualize this a little bit before we go a little further. So the big story, I mean, this was like this was what they call an A1 story, right? Like this was a front page New York Times story,
A blockbuster
story about Hamas's like targeted specific campaign of sexual assaults as a weapon of war on October 7th. This, I think, to the even semi-astute observer outside, this had kind of come after the claim of 40 beheaded babies, which you remember was a very, very, very like tenaciously held claim.
President Biden echoed it. He said that he saw the photos.
Right. After
that, by the way, we know don't exist.
That there was that after that had been basically it hadn't been put to bed, as in there was no like real mea culpa from anybody. But after that stopped being effective because the names of the dead came out and turned out to be mathematically impossible for that extraordinary claim to be true. The new claim was that Hamas had engaged in this sort of like rape warfare. And with the subtext being that like these are this is an unspeakable evil that we have to do whatever we have to do to take care of. And so this was like really sort of like the banner like mainstream media news article kind of coming out in support of this.
And in fact, we also obtained an email from the executive editor basically saying that explicitly, saying this is the type of reporting that the New York Times makes its name off of. This is an example of the type of powerful research reporting intensive story that we can do. And then immediately even casual observers start just going on Instagram and finding these witnesses' Instagram posts and showing the discrepancies and also looking into their backgrounds. As in one case, one of the key named witnesses was a former IDF member serving in the intelligence directorate. So it starts to crumble pretty quick.
And so, what did you find with this story? Because this was like, I mean, the whole thing I remember when this came out, it was like, this is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter that got behind this, and it's like, and I looked through it, and it was the same. I think I encountered the same thing as you. I was like, this is not very like it hedges quite a bit, and there are like essentially no first person really accounts of this happening. There's people saying they witnessed something that could be, or like maybe an aftermath of something that could be, but like there wasn't anybody being like, I was raped by Hamas during this.
Right, and in fact, like the banner kind of like the banner source basically, which were family members basically of a woman who's killed on October 7th, they basically came out and said, your timeline's all wrong, and you mischaracterized what we said, and we're not saying that maybe there wasn't some sexual violence that occurred, but you got it wrong with the person that you contacted us for. So just this was just like at the basic fundamental level of the building blocks of this story, all of them seem to have holes in it. And I think, what's today?
The 30th.
Yeah, so yesterday there was this the same lead reporter published what was supposed to be like the follow-up, the shoring up of the article. And, basically the article was like, a lot of people criticized this article.
Yeah.
And, there's going to be another investigation. And that's it. And that's the best they could come up with as like an assigned rebuttal, apparently, to the criticism.
Yeah, I mean the rebuttal article that you mentioned mentions online criticism, and like it poses the article as being like this truthful thing that had kind of come under attack by essentially online trolls who were trying to
Right, because
disprove
of the partisan nature of the subject matter.
Yeah.
We should back up, though, a little bit and say, so the Times response was to pull this episode of The Daily that was supposed to come out, that was basically telling, again, all of the American commuters out there on their way to their email jobs or whatever, as people love to say. But, that everyone's listening to this in the morning, they get the kind of daily digest of the big Times piece. This was set to run January 9th, I think, and they pulled it because of not just those online trolls, but of internal pressure as well.
Yeah, I mean, from our reporting, it was like, and this has been a constant theme with all the outlets and media companies that I've reported on, is like just people on the inside who are in the news business can feel the discrepancy between what they're seeing in real time from Twitter and other social media outlets, and their ability as people, as reporters, to like parse what's real and what's not, and the stuff coming out of their publications. And I think across the board, it's reaching a boiling point where people are willing to push back internally on things that they don't want to be their legacy. They don't want to have their name on. And so there was a big internal uproar. There was a message that the Times said was coincidental, but that was basically saying like, you can't attack your colleagues on Slack.
Yeah.
Which everyone knows you can.
Yeah, you can.
That's what Slack's for.
So, and so ultimately the episode was, the Times spokesperson told us that, news is always evolving, and, we're always, adjusting things and revising things. But ultimately,
that's not really how it works. That's not really how.
We're always refining our process.
So we're just like sitting on this. I know that's the funny thing about I don't know if it was in a statement to you guys, or I think it was in your article where somebody from the Times says like, well, it's not final until like the actual podcast drops. But I think it is a good indication of your confidence of the story that you're basing a podcast episode about if it couches itself in heavy caveats that the story itself, an A1, page 1, front page story, did not fucking contain, right? And like, it's clear that there is some dissent here, and like, and this is a major. I mean, this isn't just like us talking about like a story that has some controversy around the way it was reported. Like, this is a major piece of the information war, I guess, that's going on, sort of in the background and in the press in America, and just in the ether between Israel and Palestine. This provides major ammunition to people who want to defend the flattening of Gaza, and it should be great care taken with it. And it really seems like they're at first there was this rush to publish, and now that there's this sort of walking behind the scenes walking back. Yeah,
and I mean, like, you could see this sort of push. I think there was a lot of campaigning kind of for, on the one hand, it was like the IDF and Israeli government had really failed to provide its own investigation into the claims of sexual violence. And then that sort of opening like created this wave of people saying like there's this like mass rape denialism happening, when really I think a lot of people were sort of saying like, well, the government and the IDF haven't provided concrete evidence, and people asking for that evidence sort of got picked up as this wave of denialism. And then it sort of seems like the Times set out to say like, okay, we're going to do the conclusive story showing this. And, and they stuck this Pulitzer Prize winner on it who, talking to a lot of people, like I talked to probably 20 people, who have had touched this person's reporting or interacted with this person, and like, you know, you can go back and read his memoir Love Africa to get a sense of
Crazily enough, the same name as my fucking memoir, which is just really aggravating.
yeah.
But
I mean, I would suggest, you know, check out the Times review of that book too if you want some good
I'm putting exclamation
intel
point at the end of
gilman.
Africa
Yeah.
on mine.
But
Well,
I think,
yours is
yeah.
the United States of Africa,
United
so it's a little
States of
different.
Africa.
Yeah.
But I honestly think like putting him on that story is really fascinating, given the fact that like, okay, he won this Pulitzer, but also like, if you were a critical editor or reporter, like looking at this guy and looking at his track record and, you know, his reputation as honestly a shoddy reporter, and you're like, okay, we're gonna bet it all on him doing the definitive article on this extremely sensitive. You know, it's not just Israel and Palestine. You're also talking about sexual violence. Two
Yes.
very sensitive, maybe the two most sensitive topics you
Yeah.
could possibly combine. And you know, and I think it's clear that it really blew up in their faces.
Well, I'm curious. What do you think? I mean, I don't know. You probably don't want to speculate. I'm not going to put you in a position where you feel like you have to say, I don't want to speculate. But if you were going to speculate, I mean, I'm curious, like, how something like this happens. Because I think that, you know, for myself, for our listeners, you know, we don't work in a newsroom. I think that there are various points through if we want to say like the assembly line of a story getting published, you know, where pressure can be kind of exerted, whether it's like at the point of the story, like we want to put you on this story, or we want you to not look at this side of the story, or we want to carve out some of these edits, or whatever it is. But I'm curious because, like, if you can give us some insight into some of those possible kind of, you know, pressure points. You know, you've been covering for The Intercept since October 7th at slew of stories at different publications, whether it's at Art Forum or CNN or
Axel Springer.
Axel Springer, which is still a crazy ass fucking name for a publication.
There's the hint of the Heil behind it.
They
yes.
do things a little bit differently in Germany, but you know, all of these different kind of, you know, internal and external pressures that various publishers are feeling or exerting on this specific topic and journalism covering Israel and Palestine. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of an insight on some of this internal machinations here.
To get at it, I might talk a little bit about like this sort of second half of the New York Times article, which was about the sort of long history of this pro-Israel watchdog group, Camera, which basically just, you know, has this mass membership. They claim 65,000, more than 65,000, who just like will, you know, they'll call editors, they'll incessant emails, you know, hundreds of emails, and you know, they've been doing that for decades now. And by the way, Joe Kahn, executive editor's father, was on the board of Camera.
I want to put a little magnifying glass over that sentence right there. So Joe Kahn, the executive editor of the New York Times,
That's correct.
the newspaper.
You got it.
His father was on the board of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, which is part of the broader ecosystem of like Canary Mission, you know, AIPAC, all of these kind of like pro-Israel, very aggressive advocacy groups.
Yeah.
With big online footprints.
Big
by the
online
way.
footprints. And his father was on the fucking board of that, and their whole thing is to criticize newspapers for not taking a pro-Israel slant.
Yeah, and
but within the language of it it's neutral, right? Because they start from the position that all these newspapers are pro-Palestine,
Right.
and so they're trying to get them back to the center, which is pro-Israel.
Right. To be clear, Leo Kahn, who in the article heralding Joe Kahn's appointment was described as dissecting news articles with his son, left the board when Joe stepped into a edit position. So it should just be really clear about that.
To be completely clear about that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to worry about here.
No confusion.
But I mean, this is pretty. I had not known this because this seems pretty extraordinary.
I don't think anyone really knew that, but it goes to your point, Liz, about the way that there are these sort of unspoken standards that have been established, partly through just like the pure miasma of ideology of how people internalize what is appropriate coverage for a topic. But then there's also these glimmers where you can see the way that standardized kind of base level of ideology is established. Camera being part of it, where they're constantly hounding. But I think that what we're seeing right now is this moment where all of a sudden that midpoint of coverage, that middle ground of how all kinds of news coverage is editorialized, what's allowed in, what types of words you can use to describe the conflict, all of a sudden that whole thing is being shaken to its core. And I think a lot of the leaders in newsrooms are being kind of blindsided by it. I think that what my reporting has demonstrated outside of the internal workings of these newsrooms is that people are at a breaking point where both inside the organizations, they're willing to share internal documents and directives with me, but also the masses on the outside are holding these organizations to a level of scrutiny that they've never been held before. And it's constant. And it's reached a critical mass where the leaders can no longer ignore it, because you have so many people constantly on social media picking through every article, criticizing certain claims, doing their own, at times, open source reporting on the claims, and then funneling those critical claims back into the mainstream news, where reporters like myself, or even mainstream reporters are picking them up. So I think really there is just a complete sort of realignment happening in the global perspective on this, and it's just reached such a fever pitch that the people who are normally able to hand down the editorial line are just seeing a total reversal, both in their readership and in the staffers who they rely on to get that editorial line out. Basically, people are not taking it anymore.
Do you think it's shaking their confidence?
I mean, I think it varies kind of place to place, but I also think there's a reflexive element where I think when people on the inside see colleagues, speaking out about stuff, they get incentivized and empowered to push back and push back against that sort of, that senior executive edit behemoth. But also, to address the other point you raised, I think it's critical that people understand that the way that this power mechanism works is not like you come with an article about a hospital bombing, in Gaza, and they say, we're not running that. It's like, okay, we're going to put this through 15 sets of review. We're going to shave off certain words. We're going to put the IDF spokesperson line at the top of the piece. So
moves things down to paragraph 20. That's always my favorite.
Yeah, and also, but it also creates
always
a system.
Always read paragraph 20.
It creates a beating down of reporters where you're like, what? Am I going to take a risk going into Gaza, going to Nablus, putting my life on the line, fighting, staying up late to edit this piece, put my heart and soul into it? If
missing
I know,
my kids, recital.
They're just, missing my kids.
Don't miss the wife, but, miss the kids.
And it's like, no, the answer to that question is no, I'm not. You're not going to keep beating your head against the wall when you know how much shit you're going to have to go through.
Well, so it's this sort of unspoken, I guess, funnel into conformity, and whether it's a worn down conformity or one that people are sort of striving towards, it amounts to the same thing where we talked a little bit before recording. You're people I think really just want a smoking gun of an editor being like, this story is not pro-Israel enough, so we're gonna kill it. And these people are not fucking stupid, you know what I mean? And some of them, I'm not gonna say all of them, but some of them probably don't even really realize they're doing it because they're also have this reflexive thing in their head. And frankly, I think people sometimes make the mistake of assuming that everybody has these good politics, but they're being tricked by somebody else into having bad politics. When it's no, many people at the times probably firmly believe that Israel is in the right or whatever. I mean, that's a fairly mainstream opinion in a lot of circles. And so, but they also know that they can't they have this kind of play acting dedication to the news and the truth. But if the truth and the news don't exactly suit their ideological aims, they'll do these sort of shavings and mess arounds with the articles.
I will say to contradict myself a little bit. Like, I do think that there's one point though where people also have like, going back to like the Vatican metaphor, it's like people also have like a religious commitment oftentimes to, I mean, especially the New York Times.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
so
I've heard
old,
that.
but also like, I think like probably the same at like CNN or like, you know, the Post or something, where it's like the institution has this like weird like life force energy that people become obsessed with. And I do think sometimes people will make the justification of like, well, this place is the guardian of truth. Like Trump is always calling it like the lying New York Times or whatever.
Yeah.
So
And
then,
TrueAnon.
And TrueAnon, yep.
Yep.
And so like I think sometimes there also will be a step taken where like some big hitter comes and calls up, you know, a member of the editorial board or whatever and is like, you guys are fucking up and like we will fuck you.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it is like that old school like mafia stuff, but I think on a day-to-day basis, it's much less of that and much more of this like soft power. It's coming at all angles and just like exhausts you and wears you down.
Well, it's funny too because there was so much reporting about this like woke rebellion at the New York Times, which was so fucking funny to me. Because it's like, come on, you guys work at fucking Der Stürmer, you know, like, but it's like there was so much like in like a couple years, I think probably during 2020 when everyone went insane, but in like 2020 there was like this crazy like upheaval in all these newsrooms with all these sort of like woke, you know, I guess everyone who works at this place is a former college student, but you know what I mean? Like these kind of young people are like, we're gonna like, you know, this newspaper is supposed to be like something like, they're like, it's leftist or whatever. Like we're gonna do the leftist New York Times.
Was that like when they were like bullying Barry Weiss?
It was mostly at the opinion section, to be fair, not really in the newsroom.
Which is, they've really been replaced Barry Weiss and Herkin with some really great communist op-ed writers. But it's so hard to take seriously because it's like you work at the New York Times, you know. But it's like the staffers for Biden being like, we're for Gaza. It's like you work for Biden, but it's funny because that stuff is like has been brewing in newsrooms because like a lot of young people are kind of more, for lack of a better word, woke, I guess, than older people, and part of that is like Palestine has been kind of folded into that, and so I think you're coming up against like real ideological like barriers for a lot of people who work at these news outlets, where like they're like, this comports. I mean, and I'm sure not a lot, maybe not a lot, but I'm sure that some of these people are genuinely like think about this and believe in this in a real way. But I think for like maybe a lot of people or whatever it is, they kind of come up against these ideological barriers where the career path that they've chosen does not match with maybe their political opinions. And the career path that they've chosen, like at the New York Times or these media institutions, is a lot more powerful force than the ideology that they might hold.
Yeah, and it's crazy talking to people at legacy media institutions because like to get through the door at one of those places,
it's pretty serious.
You need to have like some crazy last name, or you need to have just like fucking just done the internship and kept your nose clean and just done every step. And it's fascinating talking to people at these legacy institutions where it's like they're completely torn because on the one hand they're like, oh, I thought like, you know, I made it. I made it into this thing. Like I did the thing. Like now I'm at the arbiter of truth for America. And then they're also usually pretty intelligent. I mean, depending on the last name, they're usually pretty intelligent people. And they're like, and especially if they're younger people, you know, they're just exposed to social media in a way.
Exactly.
I mean, it's such a boring fucking explanation to like always point
just
back
to
to
be like social media changed everything.
But it's kind of, in my experience, like it's true because you have these like shitheads at the top of mastheads, right? And like they aren't real. They're like, fuck this. Like I don't believe in this. This is dumb. This is you know, for the Scrabble. But it's like, so like they're just not even exposed to it in the same way. But then like when you just have people like a decade or two younger than them, like it just completely rewrites the code.
Well, especially when so much reporting now is done through social media contacts, right? I mean, like so many people reach out via social media because how else do you cultivate sources? I mean, or it's a way to cultivate sources and talk to people in so many ways.
I met Sydney Sweeney.
Never mind. I was going to say
highly
I'm not gonna
cultivated
say
source for me.
But I think that, like, you know, just thinking about the times, this like Vatican metaphor, which I do think is like very spot on. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then seeing I would imagine a kind of like the disillusionment of this sort of like bureaucratic, the way that the newsroom is set up, which is very structured, very bureaucratic in its way, where, some of the sort of parts where this kind of power can be exerted, it's like, what you were saying, that, sometimes it's not that everyone has this ideological belief or whatever.
Yeah.
But they have a belief in the institution, which pushes them to kind of, well, maybe this reporting like, even if it's right and the language that's being used is correct, it doesn't feel right in this
exactly,
situation
totally. Yeah.
because it's so raw and because, like, there's something about this specific situation. I don't know why I keep calling it a situation. There's something about the fucking, the war in Gaza that is so brutal and is so like, we were talking about this with John Dolan, the other day, where it's just like, there is something about the war in Gaza that is destroying a lot of 20th century, like, artifices from the 20th century. Some of that being, I think, in this instance, these, what maybe beliefs that young people might have within these institutions of journalism for holding up on, some of the promises of the good, 1970s journalists holding truth to power.
Yeah, totally. I think,
but there's something about, in both, like, Bibi's complete flouting of all kind of international law. The U.S., I was listening to John Kirby on the way here, and his answers to, the story about UNRWA and this, and their alleged employees being, Hamas supporters or whatever, and his response to the ICJ hearing, and the way that, like, it's just a complete and total fuck you to these real supposed, like, hallmarks of international justice, humanitarian, et cetera, peace, this, all of this stuff that has been held up for so long, that there's something about this that is so fucking, like, the brutality is so in your face that it cannot be ignored, that it's just like stripping away whatever's left of these things.
Yeah, and I think, I was just going to say one other thing on that note of, like, how some of this could change those monolithic structures of, like, the Times or whatever, where, I don't know, I think it's interesting, like, I think the IDF will often feed news in the same way that like, the U.S. military will to, like, large publications, which is that they'll offer an exclusive, right? And then it'll be like, well, you just have to, like, and it's a way of controlling the narrative by being like, okay, you got to publish what we say now, or we're going to give it to someone else. And that's starting to break
very classic.
down. Yeah, it's very classic. But now all of a sudden, they can't, the time lapse between that statement getting written up in a major publication and then, like, someone immediately disproving it is getting narrower and narrower. And it used to be that, like, it would stretch out a little bit and they could do some follow-up and they could sprinkle some more distraction into it. But, like,
or pull a retraction even and no one would notice.
Exactly, or stealth edit. But now that's breaking down. I think it'll be interesting to see, like, if it changes any of the other, if it has a rippling effect to other kind of newsroom practices of changing the fundamental way that, like, these types of reports get transferred in. And republished.
It's so interesting too, because, like, I think that we are, and we've talked about this in the show a bunch, like, I think social media, I'm not just talking about in relation to Israel-Palestine now, I'm talking about in general. There's a lot of noise and bullshit and, like, smoke and mirrors and just fucking fake shit out there. Fake shit that, like, a lot of people buy into. And, we talked about sort of the permeability of reality and, like, that breaking down for a lot of people, both in the, like, the sense of the news and information that they consume, which goes, like, essentially gives everybody schizophrenia. And it's funny because, not that I think the New York Times is an arbiter of truth. I don't think that. But it becomes so glaringly apparent that there are very few arbiters of truth, which is really, like, it's almost like there's no good solution, right? Like, there's no, like, there's none of these institutions that you can rely on to, like, give you the straight facts or whatever.
Yeah,
or,
it's like what I was telling you the other day. You can get any opinion you want on the internet. You can get any opinion, from fascist to, I don't know, whatever.
Ultra-Maoist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everything in between. But you can't actually you can't read any thing about what's actually just going on. You can get everything else, but getting the news is impossible.
So like it seems like within these institutions, a lot of these it's like they're already pretty degraded in a lot of the public's eyes, right? Like I feel like very few people under the age of 40. I mean, that's probably not true, but very few people I know under the age of 40 like take the New York Times at face value or with good faith or anything like that. But it seems like within these institutions as well, there is this sort of like generalized discontent. And it's like almost like a sort of funhouse mirror of what's happening on the outside.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know. I think it's like, it almost gets at a broader issue with just like the people who have climbed to the top of literally all publications. Like, I think you can make the argument too with a lot of like left-wing, like old school or just generally like left-wing publications, like the ones that are even remaining. Like, the people running those places are old as shit.
Yes.
And like they do not understand what is happening. They don't understand the point you just made about like young people being able to go out and just like get whatever they want. They still like view themselves as part of this like coherent ecosystem. Yeah. And so I think there's a piece of it too that is just like we're in this like weird moment where I can't remember, I was telling someone else this other day, but like we're in this weird no man's land where like the old institutions have not completely failed yet, but also like the new base of people who are like coming up who are going to like eventually be like, people with disposable incomes and people who are going to be like funders, like upper middle class and like middle class people, like are no longer really attached to any of this shit. And so it's just everything feels like it's constantly breaking down because we're watching these systems like fall apart in real time, but somehow they're still standing even after just like perpetually embarrassing themselves over and over again.
Sort of decaying
corpses.
So,
or decadent in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, as someone like as a relatively young reporter trying to navigate this like collapse, that's kind of what I see, where you have this new generation coming into these places being like, okay, we want to change it, but also it's almost too fucked up to change. So we kind of just have to like talk about that. And there can't really be a coherent vision for what replaces it yet because, like it's not going to be pure social media because like what you just said, it's completely all over the place.
Totally.
But also it kind of feels like the old model has to be completely torn up because it's not working.
Oh, and it's especially that sort of phenomenon occurring at the same time as this like information war is happening in Israel and Palestine is really astounding to see, right? Like, and it's we've talked about this in the show several times, but like Israel's response to like Israel's public messaging and it's propaganda that it's putting forward is so ineffective to anybody but those who are like most receptive to it in the first place and who it is not necessary for. That it's sort of astounding because that is also like one of the big sort of institutions, which is like the Israeli propaganda machine and like Hasbarist, and it is not functioning as well. I mean, they have fucking Brett Gelman there, for Christ's sake. Like that is, my God.
But at the same time, like a lot of this mainstream stuff, I think like I just, the other day on last Friday morning, I was having a conversation with someone and they mentioned to me, and it was about an hour it was like 3 or 4 hours after the ICJ ruling dropped. And they said to me, did you see that the U.S. found that UNRWA employees were Hamas members? And that's what they had heard. They hadn't heard anything about the ICJ. They hadn't heard anything like that. And so I do think that for not clued in or not super like, social media, I mean, people who are not like very, very ideologically invested in the conflict, which includes probably most of America. What they're hearing is filtered through. I mean, they're going to get the news from that daily episode that was pulled. And so, like, I do think that this kind of shit really is still, it's like, in a way, I guess maybe that the decadent descriptor works then in this sense, right? Because it is effective up to a point and up until like a certain population, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's a risk of over-exaggerating like how, and I'm talking about myself here, like of how ineffective this stuff is because it is still effective. Because like the article that, you're criticizing, the Jeffrey Gettleman fucking article, which is, I reread it this morning, or actually last night and this morning, and it is just sort of astounding. But that stuff does get a lot of purchase, right? And more than that, like, it's not even. I
And
have to remember-
retractions don't.
What's that?
Retractions never
Retractions
get
don't,
purchased.
no.
No
No.
one remembers when a story is retracted.
No, of course not. But like, unless it like gets warrants its own story, but
Right.
that's a very rare occurrence, especially with the New York Times. But like, this stuff also provides cover for the U.S. government, right?
Yeah.
And so like, you can have Kirby go up there, such an unpleasant looking individual.
I mean, he
by the
looks
way.
like Josh. What's his face?
He looks like the little baby son from what's that fucking show with the family? They live in the house. God, it's a very popular TV show. Not Young Sheldon. No.
No, he looks like the Trump family kid.
Barron. He does look a
No,
little
not
bit.
Barron. The fucking.
Junior?
Oh my God, the one married to Ivanka. What's his fucking face?
Oh.
Jared
Kushner?
Kushner. I was gonna call him Josh Kushner.
Kinda looks like
He
Kushner.
looks like Jared Kushner.
I don't know. He looks
Post
like
surgery.
he looks like what the family that lives in. It's like a house that's under construction, and it's like a sitcom that's like funny or whatever, and it has David Cross in it.
Now the story of a wealthy family who lost
I
everything.
have no idea what you're talking about.
Arrested Development. He looks like the little baby guy from Arrested Development.
Michael Cera?
Not Michael fucking Cera, dude. The dude, he's like an adult,
Oh,
but he's
Buster.
He looks like Buster. He looks like that.
I think
dude.
he looks like Jared Kushner because he's very vampiric as well.
Anyways, I think a lot of this reporting doesn't. It's like I have to remember that like Brett Gelman isn't trying to convince me or whatever, right? And Brett Gelman maybe is a bad example here, but like a lot of this like propaganda isn't trying to convince me. Like they're like they gave up. They're like that. If you have a critical eye, it's a way for the U.S. government to be like, well, there's some credible reporting on this topic, but it's also a way, like you said, for be like. For the Israeli kind of propaganda machine to be like, you're a rape denier now. And that replaced completely, you're a beheaded baby denier.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the quality of the propaganda has necessarily changed. Like,
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in Israel, and like I have Israeli friends, and like looking at their feeds.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you just would have no. It's not. It's such an extreme level. It's so lacking in context that it actually, when you see it in that vacuum of their algorithm,
Yeah.
it's like it actually doesn't seem that fucking crazy because there's no one in the comments being like this guy was arrested for like lynching, Palestinians. It's just like he's like, yep, like we have to go, we have to go settle it so that we can put in plumbing. There's no plumbing there.
Yeah.
We got to get some plumbing in there. So I think that the propaganda has always been completely insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now it's just like for the first time you have so many people paying attention day after day, opening up social media, self-educating. being
A society of
fuck is this?
debunkers.
Yeah, honestly. And I think that's the big change because the shit is just being contextualized for the first time.
Well, and it's also, I think you run up to this point where it's like every day, if you use social media in a way that isn't just like looking at Stanley Cup videos or whatever, but even probably if you do, like every day you're presented
Lead
with images
poisoning.
that like evoke the girl running in front of the napalm in Vietnam, right? Of like dead children, like ad nauseum, dead children, dead children, dead children, dead children. Adults, maybe adult men in their underwear with their heads behind their heads, which is, I think, to a lot of people sort of subtly reminiscent of those ISIS execution videos as well, because
Yep.
that's a pretty, I mean, that's where my mind goes.
And Abu Ghraib.
And Abu Ghraib,
Yep.
exactly. That you generally don't see that in the context of a good thing happening. I think that like, for a lot of people seeing this, it's like, well, I'm seeing these like horrible, horrible, horrible images, and then like, it's if you're not even really a young person anymore, Netanyahu has been the leader of Israel for like most of your life.
Yeah,
Or, like,
well, Vietnam's a great example. Like you think about the pictures from Vietnam that won Pulitzers and
Yeah.
shit. And it's like now every day there's like 15 of those
Yes.
pictures. And I think also like I've never been like I love All the President's Men or whatever as much as the next guy, but I've never
Okay,
been like
pause.
journalists are like the fucking
Yeah, journalists
heroes
are
of
the
the
goat.
world. Like I've never been that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
But or like journalist's job is so hard. But I will say that I think part of the change you're seeing in newsrooms is that like when you're a journalist, like you are looking at that shit all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
and if
yeah.
you're not, you're like, okay, I can take a day off. But I think that also has had an effect where it's like just like even for myself, it's just like looking through this shit every day. It's like it is just so fucked up. And I think that also, again, that goes to the like social media is the main catalyst for all this shit. Is like, that just like as a human being, like that volume of death and suffering is not normal. And it's also like you'd have a couple of those pictures in the print Times or whatever, right? Like in the early 70s, and like that would have this
Explosive
effect because people didn't have access to anything.
And the TV completely changed.
TV, yeah.
Vietnam.
But
as
it's like
well.
now Israel is like the biggest provider of snuff films in the fucking world, and like that has an effect on people.
Yeah, and especially I just think like these people in the newsrooms who are forced. There's an irony of them being forced to look at it over and over and over again, and then just basically losing their fucking minds. I mean, most people at the publications I've reported on, basically talking to them, you can feel in them that like something broke. in
Yeah.
them. And many of them were like long career people at a single organization who had been there for years or decades in some cases, and they had seen all kinds of horrible coverage. Some of them had lived through Iraq, and this broke them.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of stuff are you hearing from these people? You can speak in obviously general terms.
I mean, I don't think it's that much more complicated than what I just said. It's really the day-to-day grind for them, and the feeling of like this feeling. There's a new type of feeling, which is not just like we're conveying the egregious sentiments of our respective political leaders anymore. It's like we are directly implicated every day in pushing this shit out. And I think they can feel how day to day the conflict is shifting. They can feel that feeling of when history happens, when you can like feel that everything is up in the air and that small changes can like really affect whether, another 5,000 people die, whether 500,000 people starve or 1 million people starve, where, the whim of MBS could shift a mass biblical level exodus into the Egyptian desert or a Arab sanctioned, reflourishing in Gaza. So I think there's also this feeling of feeling the daily 24-hour news being so responsible for what's happening in a unique way and so much changing. I mean, this feels like the longest news cycle I can remember in my life.
Yeah,
right?
I'm
unending.
Shocked by how because even with other wars and stuff like Ukraine, you kind of stopped hearing about until they're like, hey, look, we're going to do an offensive. But and then it failed. But it's like this is stayed on the top of the news every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's always something new, and there's a constant. I think also part of it is just like how out of control Israel has gotten from under like any.
I mean, they're just so clearly like acting with like no regard for anything, and I think anyone with any kind of sense. I mean, it's funny because thinking back to the way in which journalists conducted themselves during the Trump admin versus now.
Yeah.
Like I'm curious because my feeling is that I think a lot of people in that profession had a feeling that like, okay, once democracy has been resurrected from darkness or whatever, like now that Trump is out and Biden's here, not like our work is finished because our work is never done as journalists, but maybe some of the aggression from these sort of centers of power, the White House, DOD, whatever it is, like are, would maybe ease up. Like maybe there's more access or maybe things will kind of chill for a bit. And yet it's been total, like you say, like the most nonstop news cycle. But also I think like listening to, like I said, I was listening to the State Department briefing and listening to those pool reporters, like you can hear in the questions that they're asking and the stonewalling that they're getting from state, where like literally like you listen to these briefings and it is, these pool reporters are not fucking stupid, like it takes a long time to get through and get that kind of access and all of that kind of shit. And it's a very specific type of reporting. But like you are getting like pissed on and being told it's raining. Like there is a complete and utter denial coming from the White House and the State Department of like reality and what's happening in a way that like I don't my suspicion is that a lot of these people did not anticipate from the Biden administration. And that is adding to a lot of disillusionment about, either what people maybe thought about the partisan nature of politics, or about how things would change, or these sort of promises, and or Trump being this certain kind of aberration, or whatever it was. You ask these questions saying, does the U.S. have a response to Bibi? It was just today, to Bibi saying that, we're blowing up hostage negotiations, and just a complete denial of what's actually going on and what Israel is doing. And you can hear in their questions that they're breaking.
Yeah. And also, there's just been unprecedented leakage out of state for this administration.
Really?
I mean, I'm blanking on his name, but there's this tremendous HuffPo reporter who's just been
Oh, I know who you're talking about. The guy they called a liar.
Yeah.
And I don't remember that dude's name, but yeah.
And there was that really, really high profile State Department resignation.
Yeah. And there's all the waves of kind of whistleblowers coming out and saying, that people are attempting to stop State Department or change State Department policy and are getting stonewalled.
Yeah. So yeah, I think but it's all combined with everything. It's one more step of the Biden administration just going into this election and just being nope, we're holding the old school Democratic Party line, even as the world is falling down around us.
Yeah.
They're still in the bunker, just being okay, this is going to get us through. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday who was I think you can feel this a lot of the press are holding their breath for this election. And on the one hand, it's all this horrible shit is happening. And the other hand, it's all right, let's just fucking get over the finish line of the election. And, the point he was making to me was it's really important for the press to hammer these people now who are doing all this horrible shit, because there's a good chance that Biden does eke it out. And if he does eke it out, then the line is going to be all right, we have to double down on anti-immigration. We have to double down on bombing the shit out of Yemen. We have to double down on all of these failed policies that have brought us to this point, because that's what won us the election. And so I think it's good to see some people in those pools hammering, but also it's clearly it still hasn't fully broken through where you just have the press just nailing Biden to the wall. If this was post-election, it would be a bloodbath.
Well, that's the wild thing about this, right? I think it's because a lot of reporters genuinely think that if Trump becomes president, it'll end democracy. And I think that we've talked about this on the show before. It's the fifth time I fucking said that this episode, but we have talked about this a bunch on the show before. I think a lot of these reporters who are sort of the type that are kind of high on their own supply, I guess you could say, view themselves as the frontline warriors in between Trump and ending democracy. And so part of that project is yes, this sort of truth is maybe not for now.
Yeah, well, yeah, and just oh god, I mean, this is tangential, but just
go for
the
it.
The number of fucking outlets that hire just right-wing extremism reporters being this is hitting back at Trump and Trump's base in the world that Trump created, when it's you are just taking the bait. You're failing to report on any of the shit that led the basic underlying conditions that led to all of this shit.
Plus half those guys are federal informants anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what? And
just get a DOJ report.
Yeah,
it's so many Twitter bios. It's right-wing extremism expert. And it's
I'm also a right-wing extremism expert.
SPLC intern.
It's what about just old school reporting about corruption and the Democrats and Republicans who are just skimming off the top and allowing their communities to fester and devolve.
Well, I think the problem too is speaking for myself, looking at this election, I don't think this is controversial to say. I really don't want Donald Trump to be president again. And I think that would be very bad, as much as I hate all available options. But I think that the press and kind of Americans in general have run into a problem, which is a sort of boy who cried wolf situation, which we've talked about, which is that like you say, the press say oh, democracy is going to end, and they want to stop this whole from happening. But it's oh, but democracy didn't end last time. We already did it, and democracy didn't end. And just speaking as American Joe, and the stock market did pretty well. You remember that? So you're sort of fighting those two things.
Yeah, totally.
Even if you can kind of, I think a sophisticated person can look down the fucking barrel and see what would be there possibly on the other end. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't know, what does the Biden what does the second Biden term look like? Like
He dies. He dies.
No, but if the lesson they learned is like you can fuck every major constituent and still win, like
Yeah.
what does that?
While campaiigning via Zoom
Yeah.
or whatever they're gonna
Yeah.
have him do.
Oh yeah, when they put COVID-20 out. Yeah, but no, I agree. I think that it's going to be. It's so funny because it's like I don't want Trump to win just because I can't do people being self-important again for 4 more years. But I also don't want Biden to win. So I would like to announce here that I'm endorsing RFK Jr. for president. But no, it's my thing is it's like it's such fucking bullshit, right? Like, we all know it's bullshit. We know that, like, yeah, Trump didn't end democracy in fucking 2016, 2020. Biden's, like, you know, promised new era of the most progressive president in history. Shit sucks right now. I'm sorry, whatever. It fucking does suck right now. And especially when it comes to, like, the way that the U.S. is interacting with the world. Even if, like, all the other shit wasn't happening, the very fact that, like, that Biden is co-signing the absolute carnage and bloodthirst coming from the Israeli government and the Israeli army is fucking. It's just completely intolerable.
Yeah.
And that's one of these things. It's like you will tolerate, and journalists are kind of caught in this position where it's like. I think a lot of people at these liberal outlets have to co-sign Biden because that you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is, and so. We aren't going to get, I mean, but all this just turns into, like we were saying before, the unraveling of these institutions, the loss of trust in these institutions. Not that we thought these institutions should, people like us, I guess, thought these institutions should be trusted in the first place, but for the general public. And then we just have more of this sort of chaos, too.
Yeah, and I think, like, I don't know, I think there were interesting off ramps for the press, like, in the past year. Like,
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
I think that, like Dean Phillips.
Yeah.
I know.
I gotta say, I don't really know much about him.
But his story is interesting where he just like fucking went on a suicide mission because he thought he would kind of like break the firewall, you know?
Yeah.
Like he thought he would be the tip of the spear. And like watching the powers that be just like rat fuck him and everyone else, you know, who even stepped a little, you know, same thing with like Newsom, Pritzker, Whitmer, you know, those people were all sniffing around.
Yeah.
And like that shit just got fully shut down, and there was so much out there on the table for people to pick up, and like, but I think again it was just this feeling of like, well, no, Biden's the incumbent, and like reporting on that would be silly.
Which is
Reporting on
such
that
a funny mirror to the way that the press was handling a lot of the stuff about Hillary. When you go back into 2016, 2015, there was a sort of sense of, well, we don't want to report on some of this stuff because it might give too much ammunition. Right. And then afterwards, a big sort of like, well, maybe that was wrong that we had done that and we should do it. You know what I mean? And so we're kind of back to where we were.
Yeah, totally.
But it seems like, you know, Brace, as you keep saying, like with people getting more and more collectively insane.
Mm-hmm. I just want everyone to be normal. But that's not going to happen.
Well, what does this look like moving forward? What's your sense of how this looks like moving forward? I mean, I guess not just at the Times, but like in terms of reporting on the war on Gaza, like, do you feel any kind of mainstream shift happening or?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that this whole subject is never going to look the same in reporting. I think like you just have a base of people, you know, you look at the polling on like Democrats who think that Israel's committing genocide. It's like I think like the last poll I saw, I think it's like 70% or something.
Jesus Christ.
Like we've undergone like a full scale realignment in opinion on this.
It is pretty shocking.
Yeah,
just in my lifetime,
no,
seeing
it's
like
crazy.
the kind of sea change that's happened.
And so my question is also like not just about this subject, but like what does this look like for other you know, conflicts or just any other news event where you just have this kind of eyes on the ground, like mass information distribution. That's the other just interesting piece to me is like I feel like a leg of legacy media has just gotten knocked out where you've just seen like a almost populist force of opinion change.
Yeah.
I do think that some of that is particular to like the invasion of Gaza, and that like everyone in Gaza was just the people there reaching for whatever they could, which a huge weapon of theirs was social media and getting as much footage out, and that they were, because of how long the blockade has been, because of how, it's hard, it's very difficult to even find the words to describe the situation in Gaza pre the invasion.
Yeah.
How the level of destitution and like depravity, but that's not the same in other like conflicts.
Yeah,
conflict zone is the wrong word, but in other kind of.
Right. It's a unique
It's
place
a
in the
very
entire
unique
world.
place and a
Yeah.
very unique situation that has kind of acted as a catalyst for all of these other things kind of exploding in their own way.
You mentioned before we started you have a story about Seymour Hersh, and I'd like you to elaborate.
Well,
on that.
so I wanted to mention his article from a couple of weeks ago. When I first moved to DC and I was trying to crowdsource information, I showed up to Sai's house unannounced, and he basically told me to get the fuck off of his lawn and send him an email or a phone call like a normal person.
To be fair, you got to show up 3 times before he lets you in.
Yeah, I got two more in the pocket. But he on his Substack he had a piece about when he was at the Times, and he was trying to report a story that was going to rely on U.S. intelligence sources, and he was coming up blank. So he asked someone in the office, I guess, what to do, and they recommended this Israeli ambassador by the name of Netanyahu. So he calls up Netanyahu and he tells him what he's looking for, and they have a conversation, and it's very pleasant. And the next day, satellite images of chemical weapons in Berlin, classified intelligence information, shows up at Hersh's desk at the Times. Somehow that floated under the radar, which is surprising given the current moment. But I think it also gets at a piece of how the New York Times functions sometimes.
That must have been when Netanyahu was living in Philadelphia, cheating on his Jewish wife with a goy. Which is just interesting.
Little hot tip from Brace to the rest.
It's true. It's proven. In fact, he was doing that. He was pumping away at a goy. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. I would recommend, if you want more on, especially the first part about the Times, the recent article that you co-wrote with Ryan Grimm in The Intercept about the October 7th, rape attack article. But really, a lot of the stuff, most of the article is about the camera, which should be a huge scandal. I mean, I don't know, huge, but a pretty big scandal. I really recommend that our listeners check that out. That we'll link that at the bottom here. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm about to fly to Chicago, and boy, are my
What kind of juice
lips
is that?
tired. What are you
Beet
talking
juice?
about? Oh, it's called Rockin' Beet. I got beet, carrot, apple, lemon, ginger, Rockin' Beet, and I drank half of it because that got me
That's
too
not a half,
zooted.
baby. That's a third.
That's almost exactly half. What do you think?
Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you guys are definitely never letting you guys do my penis.
I think it's great. You're very optimistic
I don't. If you drink too much juice, you get too hypey.
because of the sugar.
Because of the sugary.
Yeah, little sugary.
Yeah, but I'm probably going to drink the rest of this on the motherfucking plane so I can get up and vape in the bathroom. And you know that I'm vaping straight fentanyl. I am going to cause a scene and have a viral video of someone hit me with that motherfucking Narcan. And then I go, "Wah!" and I come back to life like a vampire. And then I start biting people. And then, bam, viral news story that fentanyl now makes you into the undead. Like Dracula.
That's a great plan. I'm Liz.
I love you. My name is Brace. We're joined, of course, by producer Jan Chomsky, and the podcast is called
TrueAnon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Let's go show Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go show Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go show Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go show Jeffrey Epstein.